All right, welcome to another edition of Garden Hour. It's great to be back and see everybody. My name is Amanda Bachmann. I'm the SDSU Extension Urban Entomology Field Specialist based in Pierre, and I will be your host tonight. I am joined by a couple of my colleagues, and while I'm waiting for them to hop back on, I will just mention to folks that if you have questions at any point tonight, throw those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical issues, you can pop that into the chat and one of us will get to you and hopefully help you out. And if we have any links or things, those will be thrown in the chat as well as we're presenting. You can also follow along with any episodes you might have missed on our SDSU Extension YouTube channel. All of the previous garden hours are there, along with some handy little recaps underneath where you can hop to the timestamp section if you just wanted to catch one of the sessions that you missed. But I'm joined tonight by Sara and Hans. So Sara is one of our extension horticulture assistants. She's actually our garden hotline person here in Pierre. So I see her in the office and get to benefit from her cherry tree that apparently shouldn't exist. So that's very awesome. But Sara, what are you going to be sharing with us this evening?
I'm going to be talking about a landscape challenge that I had in my yard and how I solved it.
Awesome. And having previewed the slides, I'm very excited. It looks really cool. And then we also have Hans Klopp, who is our soil health field specialist, and he's based in Watertown. And Hans, what are you going to be sharing with us this evening?
We're talking about managing phosphorus and managing soil phosphorus in gardens.
Awesome. And we are going to cross our fingers for your hotel internet. If you need to turn your video off while you're presenting, that is okay. But yeah, we will turn things over to Sara and kick off this episode of Garden Hour.
All right, is that working, Amanda? Good.
Yep, it looks great.
All right, like Amanda said, my name is Sara Ogan, and I am currently an extension horticulture assistant, and I answer the Central South Dakota Garden Hotline, and I'm also a master gardener, so I have enjoyed that program as well through extension. And so my landscape challenge is a sloped yard that was mulched with about 4 to 5 inches deep of this rock. As you can, it's hard to tell from the picture that it's sloped. I have another one, but I inherited this landscape. I did not plant it. But here you can kind of see the slope of it. And so the slope is pretty steep. The rock is very deep, and I was having a high mortality rate on plants. I was planting toward the front of the retaining wall because the rocks would crush them. It was so deep down to the soil, they just weren't thriving there. So after about 5 years of planting new plants every spring in those spots, I thought I needed a different solution. And so looking around through other extension sites and just visiting with people, I discovered this pot in pot landscaping method, and it's used kind of as a nursery production system, and you have one container nested inside of another, and they're both recessed into the ground. The first container, the one in the ground, is called the socket pot. And so those are some terms I'll be using throughout the presentation: pot and socket pot. So the advantages I discovered when I was researching it is that you can easily remove the plants from the socket. You pull up the pot the plant is in, you can change out the plant, you can keep aggressive plants from spreading. You have control over the soil conditions, fertilizer, and water in that pot. What you put in there generally stays in that pot. And then the plant is secured in the ground. So in the instance of my retaining wall, if I would have just set a pot on top of the rocks, that would have possibly blown over. So it was protected from wind and then also protected from the rocks crushing it. Other considerations were some of the disadvantages. Plants in those pots could become root bound if I was going to use a perennial, so that's added maintenance. The potential for underwatering, as the roots in neither of the pots have access to soil moisture. And then there is the potential for overwatering if the drainage isn't adequate. Also, the initial cost and labor to install the sockets, and then it might not look as natural in the landscape. So the first step was to dig in the sockets, and thankfully I had help from my husband. We purchased these pots, 6 pots at a box store, and they're about 4 gallons each in size. So the consideration was that I would be able to lift the pot out of the ground. I didn't want something too big that it would be too heavy that I couldn't lift it. When I needed to change the plant out, when it became root bound or a change of season. So yeah, and going back to the advantages, you could easily change your socket or the pots in the socket out seasonally with annuals if that was the route you decided to go. So once the sockets are in, I was able to place the other pots inside. Like I said, they were 4 gallons approximately. I used a soil mix of potting mix and just regular garden soil. I didn't want it to drain too quickly with just potting mix because I wasn't 100% certain how much water I was going to get to these pots. They're a little further away from my the pots I plant with annuals on my deck, so I just didn't want to have them drain too quickly, but I also still wanted them to have some drainage, so I thought a mix might work. So after I got the soil in, I planted in ornamental allium. And as you can see, by late summer, they were fully blooming in the pots. If you're looking at it from a street view, you can hardly notice the pots are behind that retaining wall, but up close you can see the pots are there. I first dug these in 2021, I believe. And so I'm on my 4th year of these allium. I keep the same plants in there and they're coming back. So it's working out pretty good so far. So in the spring for maintenance, I pull each of those pots out of the socket. I carry them to my work area. And then as you can see, when I take them out, they're fairly root bound, but I'm able to divide them, give them away or whatnot with the extras, and then I just put them back in the pot. So another possible solution that I tried on a smaller scale was planting rings, and I made my own. You can maybe see with my, I think that's the native false indigo there. So a planting ring is just the top of a pot kind of designed to hold the rocks away. So that's another option to consider if you have that slope and you just have like rock in your landscape and it's really a pain to move it out every time a plant dies or you want to change out a plant or yeah, just want to change. So those rocks are hard on your knees, they're hard on your back when you have to dig them out. So having that space to protect your plants is desirable. So that is all I have. Thanks for listening. If there's any questions, put them in the chat or yeah.
So we do have questions.
Okay.
One person wanted to know, do you leave them outside all winter? So maybe you might want to discuss like which pots stay outside and maybe where the plants, where do your plants spend the winter?
Yes, good, good question. Yes, I do leave those allium in the pots all winter long. They stay out there. I water them, not as much as I water my deck plants, but I water them frequently, especially when it's hot. And so, yeah, they've survived in there. Like I said, I'm on my fourth year of the same plants being in there. Considerations when I was choosing plants, I knew like alliums were pretty hardy. They're pretty aggressive, so they actually work great in this situation. I wouldn't have picked like a woody shrub that would have bigger roots to fit in a smaller space like that.
Have you contemplated putting like mint in one of those to see how it does?
The mint, I think, would do well anywhere.
Yeah. When you're talking about, plants that are maybe a little bit more aggressive, I'm like, ooh, that would be a really great way
Yes.
for folks who maybe want mint but want to contain mint.
Yes. A
Um,
containment unit.
yeah. Have you noticed any like pest issues with the containers? Like when I was looking at that setup, I was wondering like if moisture gets like trapped between the pot and the socket pot. I was thinking about things like earwigs, maybe like things that kind of like those dark environments.
Right. And I only lift the pots out in the spring when it's fairly dry. So if there's critters in there any other time of the year after a rain, I'm not looking for them. And so there has not been any in there that I'm aware of. They certainly could be there, but like I said, I lift them in the spring when things are pretty dry and before a lot of things have kind of came out for the year.
Hmm. Yeah, and if anything's hanging out there like during the summer, maybe it's just not in high enough numbers that it's causing any sort of issue for the plants that you've chosen for that location. Yeah, I do not have a boulevard with rocks, but I'm like, man, I think that there's definitely some areas where like if for instance, like trying to keep like a mint plant contained or something that could be a really interesting, technique for some of the things that I'm trying to add into my garden. Do you
Yeah.
like so you said those alliums have been in the pots for like 4 years. Do you ever just like take them out and like change out the soil or do any like fertilization or
Yeah, in the spring when I lift up the pot every spring and I chop them in half and I add another batch of the soil and the potting mix back into it, just to kind of keep them from getting too root bound in
Mhm.
there. And yeah, and I had another thought, but I lost it.
We had another comment come in, not a question. Vicky said that this is a great solution for moving garden plants to covered areas during hurricane warnings. So
No.
hopefully you're joining us from someplace where there are hurricanes, but I know in South Dakota we do get very windy. We do have some hurricane force winds at times. So yeah, it was just like it's like, oh yeah, like they use this in nursery production. Like, why not use it in a garden situation?
Yeah, I had best intentions to expand this and like do where you put some petunias in the summer and then change it out for some fall mums, but I have not got that actually accomplished. It's on my to-do list.
I feel like, do you have to, I mean, as long as the socket pot and the pot with the plants are they the same?
They're the same size, yeah.
Okay. So really, as long as you have a pair of pots, you could add more, add more in. Hopefully your original pot, like, doesn't get discontinued by wherever you got it
Right.
or But yeah, no, that is super cool. Oh, okay, good. Vicky's in the Florida Keys. All right. I was gonna get real concerned with our South Dakota weather. I know we don't have Laura on for another couple of weeks, so I was gonna have to ask her where we were getting hurricane warnings. But thanks for joining us from the Florida Keys. That might be one of our most farther afield garden hour participants. But
Yeah, but
yes,
definitely hail storms, whatever. If you
yeah.
have a really valuable plant out there that you want to protect, definitely pull it in. Very easy to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I was thinking about like some of my succulents that like spend the summer outside, which I've been honestly very lazy and have not put them outside yet. And then it got really hot and I was like, they're happy inside right now. But like thinking about some of those, if I wanted to like make sort of more of a xeriscape kind of thing, but like with plants that aren't going to survive the winter, like put their little pots like right in the ground and then, bring them back in the winter, that would be kind of like that might be a way to do that. But yeah, and Sarah will be sticking around. So if anyone has questions, if you think of any questions about her gardening challenges, throw those in the chat or throw those in the Q&A. But we'll move over to Hans and talking about some of our garden soil properties.
So I'm going to talk about managing phosphorus in gardens. And phosphorus runoff from gardens probably isn't as big of pollution as phosphorus runoff from larger egg operations. But anyways, phosphorus is one of the essential plant nutrients. Here's the essential plant nutrients. The top 6 are macronutrients, which plants need more of. And the lower ones, rest of them are micronutrients. And the most needed nutrients that need to be added to the soil usually are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So a lot of fertilizers have NP and nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels. So the first number is nitrogen, the second number is phosphorus, and the last number is potassium. And the most limiting nutrient by far is nitrogen, and probably the second most limiting nutrient in South Dakota is phosphorus. But in gardens, that's frequently not the case. So here's an example of a phosphorus deficient tomato plant. I know I have weeds around in my garden. It's really weedy in my community garden. So you can see that the leaves are more of a purple color. And this is because it's not able to get enough phosphorus in the soil. And phosphorus is important for the plant earlier on in the stage because it helps with root development and the initial development of the plant and helps the ability of the plant to take up nutrients and is involved in energy transfer. And why we should be concerned about phosphorus is too much phosphorus leads to eutrophication of surface waters. And like you can see in this picture with the baby walleye caught from Lake Ponset, that the water is really green colored because there was a blue-green algae bloom that day, and that algae is toxic for humans and pets to drink the water of, and it smells really bad, and it makes the lakes not very pleasurable to swim in or use. And it also, some of it's leading to dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico too. And there's limited amount of phosphorus reserves available because how they get the phosphorus for fertilizers by mining a rock that's rich in phosphorus. And having too much phosphorus in the soil can alter soil microbial communities because certain fungi, particular arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, are not as active when the soil phosphorus level is high compared to low because they're a fungi that the plant roots form associations with, and that they have a mutually beneficial thing where the fungi will help the plant take up nutrients from the soil, and there's less of them when some studies have found there's less of them when soil phosphorus levels are higher in soils with long-term manure applications. And too much phosphorus can sometimes reduce micronutrient uptake of iron and zinc. And here's the environmental phosphorus cycle. And even though there's not a lot of the rock source of phosphorus in soils, are still some of it. So there'll be weathering of rocks, which will break down through physiochemical processes, which will form into soil. And then there'll be phosphorus from the rocks that form the soil that becomes available through the rocks breaking down. And in the underground phosphate reserve, there's some that's just bound to soil, and there's some that's in rocks. And then plants will take some of the free phosphorus from the soil and take it into their biomass or fruit, and animals will eat some of it and then they'll release it in their manure and it'll decompose and go back into the environment. And a lot of phosphorus is added back to the soil through manure. And the losses of phosphorus are through leaching and runoff back into water sources. And phosphorus doesn't leach very much except in really sandy soils or really acidic soils. But most of the phosphorus is lost from soil through runoff. And so if you have soils that have low infiltration and high phosphorus levels, you frequently will have a lot of runoff of it into surface waters. And so when it runs off into surface water, it leads to algae blooms and eutrophication or degradation of lake water quality. I know there's lots of examples of that in South Dakota. Like I know Lake Mitchell has really bad issues with it too. That's why they're draining it. So here's what they use to make rock phosphate, which is apatite, which is a calcium phosphate rock. And soil phosphorus levels get high in gardens is because many fertilizers contain the same level of NP and K, such as 10-10-10 fertilizer, and compost kind of have a similar ratio of all of them. And the compost and manures have a lower N to P ratio than is removed by the harvested part of their plant. And people frequently add nutrients to their soil, but do not soil test, and people will over fertilize their garden. And I think a lot of times when people use a compost or manure as a fertilizer, they'll just apply it at a rate of like 100 pounds per 1,000 square feet, or just put it right by where they're growing their plant so it can have the nutrients right available in the root zone. But if you don't need the fertilizer, you don't need to add it. So if you soil test and see that you have high levels of something, you can actually save money by not needing to add fertilizer. So here's the ratio of NP and K that different garden vegetables grow. And I would note that beans and peas only remove a really high level of nitrogen because they're nitrogen fixing. They don't actually take up some nitrogen from the soil, but they get a lot of their nitrogen through symbiotic nitrogen fixation and get the nitrogen from the atmosphere and convert it into organic nitrogen. Whereas the rest of the vegetables I have listed take up nitrogen from the soil, but they get all their phosphorus and potassium from the soil. So you see a lot of these vegetables remove about 2 to 4 times more nitrogen than phosphorus. But if you add a 10-10-10 fertilizer, something that has like a N to P ratio of 1 or 1.5 or 2, you're adding more phosphorus than you're removing from the soil. And frequently with some of I'll talk about that later. And the best way to see where your phosphorus level is to test the soil. And plants get most of the phosphorus from near the surface because they need it early on in their growth. So you only need a sample from the 0 to 6 inch depth. And to collect a sample to measure phosphorus, you want to take it from multiple spots from your garden, not just one spot, to kind of get an average value throughout the garden. So I would take a sample from like 6 to 10 spots and place it. And when you collect the sample, if you have a soil probe, you would just push the probe down and take the top 6 inches from the probe and put it in a bucket from like 6 to 10 different spots. But if you have a shovel, I would put the shovel into the ground and take a ruler and measure out the top 6 inches, then cut like a 2-inch wide by 2-inch thick piece from each spot. And then I would place that into a bucket from like 6 or 10 different spots and then mix it together by hand. And then you take about 2 cups of the sample and you put it into a bag to send to a laboratory. And if you have NP and nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium measured, or just have a routine soil analysis done, like what I'm going to show in some of the following soil tests, that's adequate to see what your phosphorus level is. And here's a soil test I got from my community garden. You can see that there's more nutrients near the soil surface than down deeper of most of the plant nutrients. I bolded the phosphorus And these phosphorus values are pretty low for soils. They're lower than any other garden soil test I've seen, to be honest. But I don't. So in the community garden, I have the phosphorus is kind of depleted. So it requires phosphorus fertilization, but I could have soil tested and had like 100 ppms of phosphorus and didn't I needed. And this was measured in 2024. It was measured via the Malick method, and 2025 I had the Olson method. Some of these different methods to use phosphorus measured use different extractions, such as weak bases or weak acids or stronger acids, so they perform better in different soils. So, like this test, this is a sample from that I was sent from someone. I removed all their names from it, but this soil, I don't know whether it was like an old feed yard or whether they just continuously added manure or compost to it. But these levels they have rated are really high for phosphorus and potassium and nitrate. So they probably don't need to add any fertilizer. They probably could go years on end without adding any phosphorus without needing any phosphorus fertilizer because they built up such a high concentration. So essentially what the university recommendations is they have a level of the nutrients and then they can categorize it as low, medium, or high. And if the levels categorized as high, you aren't likely to see a improvement in your crop production from adding the fertilizer. Whereas if the level is low, you are likely to see a yield increase. You're more likely to see a yield increase the lower the concentration is. So SDSU recommends to use the Olson phosphorus method, which uses sodium bicarbonate, which is a weak base, which works better in neutral or basic soil. Whereas the Bray method uses an acid, which acidic solution, which doesn't perform as well in basic soils. But the amount of phosphorus that's actually soluble in water is really low. So if you have water extractable phosphorus is pretty low in soils. So essentially, if I categorize the test I had, I got the phosphorus level was low. So I'm very likely to see a response from adding it. That's why I was seeing some plants in my garden before I put down some fertilizer that were purple colored, which is a sign that they were deficient in phosphorus. So essentially, we have this equation. If you have the soil test and want me to calculate it, I can do that. I'm not going to talk about it here. But essentially, if I do the calculation, I need to add 2.4 pounds per 1,000 square feet to my garden. And here's some different fertilizers that are organic fertilizers, and you can see the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is. And if you get a soil test back and your P level would be high, phosphorus level would be high, but your nitrogen level would be low, you'd want to add a fertilizer that would have mostly nitrogen in it and not phosphorus. And what I have bold is this is from one website about the NP and K ratio of compost was, and it's has a little more nitrogen than phosphorus and potassium. And they say in compost or manures, most of the phosphorus and potassium measured in it is available within the first year, but only like 20 to 50% of the nitrogen in it is actually available the first year. So if you add it to how much nitrogen your plant needs, you're adding too much phosphorus, and that will lead to your buildup of soil phosphorus. And here's some values I got of different manures on a fresh weight basis. And you can see the solids content really vary of these manures. And you can see that a lot of these have like an N to P ratio of like 1 to 2. So if you add them to the soil, you're actually adding, the plants are removing more of the N versus the P that you're at, phosphorus that you add. So you're going to build up soil phosphorus. And ways to prevent soil phosphorus buildup is to test your soil and follow recommendations. And if you get, I know a lot of people try to just make compost and add it back to their garden and have kind of a cycle, which is a good thing to do, but sometimes you'll lead to a buildup of phosphorus. And you could plant crops such as peas or beans in your garden and just not add any fertilizers because they do not need any nitrogen fertilization. Or a crop like lettuce where you harvest a lot of the green growth can remove quite a bit of phosphorus too, and just not add any fertilizer at all. And then you'll slowly reduce your phosphorus concentration if you're not adding any phosphorus fertilizer to the soil. And use the right fertilizer source based on your recommendation. And then the take-home message is too much phosphorus in the soil can lead to environmental pollution. And really, soil testing is the best way to monitor how it changes with time, and then only add fertilizer based on what's needed based on the soil test. And long-term application of fertilizer such manure or compost or equal ratio of NPK fertilizer can lead to soil phosphorus buildup. And I would say phosphorus is really only lost via runoff because it stays bound more tightly to soil particles and forms complexes with calcium and iron in the soil. Whereas nitrogen is a lot more easily lost because nitrate is easily leached downward in the soil. So nitrogen is a lot easier to lose from the soil, and nitrogen can be lost from denitrification when it becomes anaerobic. So phosphorus usually stays in the soil unless it's lost through runoff, where nitrogen when it's converted to nitrate can be lost pretty easily from the soil. So any questions?
Yes, we had one come in that their soil sample report from University of Minnesota recommends a 10-0-0 fertilizer. Do you have any suggestions?
Can't you just get like a lawn fertilizer or certain types of lawn fertilizer that don't have any phosphorus in them? You wouldn't necessarily have to use 10-0-0. You just have to use some fertilizer that much, doesn't have much for potassium or phosphorus in it. Like I think a lot of soil tests from South Dakota, if they need nutrients, they probably need nitrogen. Or sometimes micronutrients will be low because the pH is high, like iron and zinc, but there's plenty of reserves of those nutrients. This is a pH issue for those. But I think you just want to go and look at fertilizers at the store and get one that only mostly has nitrogen in it. It's not that bad of an issue if you have too much phosphorus in the garden. It's definitely an issue in like large watersheds where you have too much of it, because that's what leads to the pollution of surface waters. So that's what I would do. I would just look for a fertilizer source that doesn't have phosphorus in it. And I know, like in Madison, Wisconsin, they wouldn't sell fertilizer with phosphorus in it because of the lake pollution where I was from.
Yeah, well, if any other questions come in, we will
You can email
grab
me
those.
or I'll stay
Yeah,
on till the end of this.
yep, we'll grab them at the end. Or yeah, Hansa's email is up there. So yeah, if you get a soil report, you can bug him directly for advice. I'll just volunteer him for that.
Sounds good.
All right, I am going to move my windows around and go ahead and share my screen maybe. Sorry guys, it's apparently been just enough weeks on this that I kind of forgot what I was doing with Zoom. All right, here we go. Okay, we got it. So I was out for a lot of June, running around doing things in South Dakota and other states. And then I got back and I was watering the garden yesterday, and I was like, oh man, I am going to be on garden hour. I should be taking some extra special care to see what's been in my yard recently. And the insects obliged. So first off, I wanted to cover the green lacewings. They are very abundant right now, at least in my yard. I think we've had sort of critical mass of all the things that they like to eat. And I've got both adults and also late stage larvae, both of which are pictured here. So green lacewings get their name because they are green and they have lacy wings. So if you notice an insect flying around that's kind of fluttery and the wings are like way bigger than its body, odds are good, green lacewing. They also like to come to porch lights in the evening, so keep your porch light off if you can. We'll talk about light pollution in a later episode because I'm going to be on for most of July, so I need to find lots of things to talk about. But the larvae of the lacewings are really great predators. And I have one pictured here that was on, I think this was a cup plant leaf. I don't quite remember what was growing in my garden, but pretty sure it was the cup plant. And I noticed this pretty large lacewing larva, and they have pointy mouth parts that they use to stab aphids and then suck them dry. So they are super fun predators. They will, I do have a scar on my wrist from where a lacewing larva bit me because I was holding it for the master gardeners to see, and that was a silly decision. But if you leave them alone, they will definitely leave you alone. But if you do see them, they are kind of this like alligator shape, a little bit reminiscent of the shape of like a ladybug larva. But they turn into these fun adults with green bodies, lacy wings, and golden eyes. Also, I don't have a picture of it, but if you are looking through your garden, scouting for stuff, and you notice eggs on the underside of a leaf that are on like a thin thread, and then the white egg is on the end, those are actually the lacewing eggs. So if you see those, leave them because those will turn into these great garden predators. So I maybe in a future week I'll dig up one of my photos of those so you guys can see the whole life cycle. But yeah, green lacewings are out and doing their thing. I also noticed that I had some damage to a volunteer ash. So obviously not a plant that is like on my list of things I'm trying to keep. But if you do notice similar damage, just know that it is not from a pest species. It's actually from a leafcutter bee. And in my yard, they tend to prefer the ash seedlings. I haven't really noticed this kind of damage on other plants. You can see the various sunflowers and perhaps some other weedy things that are around this little patch of my yard. None of the rest of them have that sort of like semicircle cut out from the leaf edge. But the bees take these leaf pieces and they use them to line the cavities where they are laying their eggs and provisioning them with pollen. So it's kind of used as part of their nesting structure. So if you do see this, it means you've got some really cool native bees hanging around your area. And, don't be alarmed. Leaves can handle a decent amount of defoliation. Also, they're not going to be hanging around on the leaf long enough for you to really like do anything about them. But we don't want to kill our native bees. So if you see this sign of the leafcutter bees, just let them do their thing and maybe, sacrifice some ash leaves to the cause. But it's always sort of very cool when I spot this in my yard. Sort of at first glance, you might think it was like, oh man, this is like some weird herbivory from like something large, but it is actually bees using their little mouth parts to cut out the edges of the leaves. I think I talked about June bugs the last time I was on, and we have another species of scarab beetle or June bug that is out and about right about this time of year, at least here in Pierre. I know folks that are in the more southern areas of South Dakota, you might have been seeing our spotted June bug or the grapevine beetle a little bit earlier, but they're out. They're a little bit larger than sort of our standard brown June bug, and I find that they have really cool little frilly antenna. You can see that in the picture here. Um, they've got three or four little sort of fronds, which I think is pretty cool. But these feed on grapevines. So, I mean, if you've got, some wild grape in the area, odds are good that you might see the Pelidnota punctata or the spotted June bug. Sometimes it also gets called spotted grapevine beetle. It's got a lot of common names, but same kind of, similar life cycle as far as sort of, emerging at some point during the month of June, being a bad flyer, and then kind of, falling off as the summer progresses. But they are one of the June bugs of summer. And I wanted to share a monarch update because I too had not looked at the map in a while. And this time I put up the map of monarch larva first sighting. So The dark green dots are actually first sightings that occurred in after June 6th. So I clicked on the dots, the dot in South Dakota and the one in North Dakota, and those were actually fairly late. They were about like June 20th. So really just, posted in the last couple of days. Obviously, there could definitely be, larvae a little bit earlier in other places that just didn't get observed and put on the map. But we've had adults in the state for about a month, so it makes sense that we've got the caterpillars as well. So I know the milkweed in my yard is sort of mid-bloom. If you could kind of see that lacewing photo it was on, some milkweed buds. But yeah, I did have a monarch in the yard the other day, pictured here on my walking onion. I was trying really hard to get a good enough like glimpse of it so I could tell whether or not it was a male or a female, because if it was a female, I was going to be, lurking in the yard seeing if it was going to lay eggs anywhere. But turns out this one was a male. I was able to kind of like sneak around. It didn't get a picture, but I was able to see the spot on the back wing to confirm that it was a male monarch. So no eggs from this one, but I have been sort of on the lookout in my yard. I find that when monarchs visit, they are just real skittish. They will fly like around, up high, everywhere but where I'm standing. So I have to be like really, really still and really patient to get a chance of either seeing if it's male or female, or then also observing its behavior as far as like nectaring or maybe even laying eggs. So monarch migration is progressing. I'm seeing lots of great stuff in bloom right now. So lots of great nectar sources out there. And for those of you that have milkweed in your yard, I've noticed that I've got some that is shorter and hasn't even gotten close to flowering yet. One thing that I think it was Michigan State released some research about a couple of years ago was actually clipping some milkweed sort of partway through the season in order to force it to bloom again. I've sort of always toyed with doing that in my yard, but I haven't yet. And this year, my common milkweed is maybe only about 3.5 feet tall. It got, I think, fairly stunted from the lack of moisture last year, and then also the really open and dry winter. So it's not nearly as tall as it normally is, but we're getting lots of great blooms, and I will be crossing my fingers that I see some monarch caterpillars in my yard at some point soon. And then just a reminder of some upcoming events. We are having Little Wings on the Prairie out here in the Fort Pierre area. It's going to be at Oahe Downstream, which is just below the dam, if you're familiar with the area. And that will be Saturday, July 19th in the morning from 9 to noon. And then, as always, we end the season with Insect Fest at McCrory Gardens on September 6th. So if you need to pick up any of our flip books in person, or if you've got some kids or grandkids that are really into bugs, we'd love to see you at one of our in-person insect outreach events. So I'm sure we'll have some more reminders about those as Garden Hour continues. But with that, I will stop sharing and see what we've got for questions for folks. Ooh, okay. If you're going to clip the milkweed, how should you do it? So kind of depends on the variety. So if you've got one that you're sort of willing to experiment with a little bit more, like say a common milkweed, that would be sort of where I would start on that. For some of the things like your Asclepias tuberosas, like your smaller milkweeds, I found that they have a little bit more of a continuous bloom time. And so I haven't, and I don't think that study looked at pruning any of those. It was really, the common or the showy milkweed, some of those big tall ones. So if you have some that haven't even started producing buds yet, you could slow them down, or just like those are going to be ones that are going to be blooming more in July. But yeah, like if you want to experiment, I would take maybe a third of your plants and, snip off the top maybe third and watch how they resprout below that. But yeah, like I've got so many blooms right now. My elderberry bush is also blooming, so there's been a lot of pollinator activity like right by my sidewalk. I kind of have to shuffle through to get to the back door. Um, None of those bees were the ones that stung me. That was last week at the Master Gardener training in Sturgis, where a bumblebee got annoyed with me and stung me a little bit. So totally my bad, not the bumblebee's fault. But yeah, people have other questions. We do have a little bit of time. You can throw those into the Q&A. And Sarah or Hans, I don't know if you guys have any bug questions for me? Just kidding. You don't have to ask me bug questions. But I
What
know
would
we
be
will
a
bring.
good sized bug that's probably about that would have flown in my tent that was like black, that was probably like half-inch long when I was in the Black Hills the other day?
Ooh, man, that could be anything. So Black Hills has trees, which means that you guys get some really interesting beetles. I've seen like my eyed click beetle that's in my collection came from the state gas pump in Rapid City. So there are a lot of like larger click beetles, even some of the large, like some of the medium to large size longhorn beetles.
I think it
So
was some I think it was some type of beetle. It was flying around in my tent. A couple of them were flying around in my tent.
next time, like catch one for me.
Send you a
Take a picture.
picture.
Yep, exactly. I got pictures from an insect from a friend of mine in Ohio, and she's like, "What is this?" And I'm going through it, and then it comes to find out it was a houseplant issue, and it turns out they were fungus gnats. And I'm like, indoor plants that would have cut down my list of suspects like so much sooner. But yeah, odds are good. Some sort of funky beetle that's using, decaying trees as part of its life cycle. Oh, question in the chat, have I encountered chiggers yet? Not yet, but that's also because I have not been hanging out at Oahe downstream for extended periods since the kids planted their flowers in May. So the May annual flower planting with the third graders did not get any chiggers from that adventure, and I actually have not been back out to see what the pollinator garden looks like recently. But if I do go back out, I will be wearing DEET, and I will be absolutely making sure that I take a quick shower when I am done, because I have not been hit by chiggers yet this year, but the mosquitoes here in Pierre are pretty hungry and pretty numerous. So I have definitely gotten hit by some mosquitoes, especially this past Oahe Days weekend. But yeah, Sarah, any like parting thoughts for
How
folks who might
how
want to
likely
try?
oh,
Okay.
how likely are you to get chiggers just walking around in like game production areas or something in South Dakota? 'Cause I never heard
Um,
of them much here.
I'm not sure. We haven't ever done like a chigger like population distribution study. But also it's one of those things that some people are way more sensitive to them than others. I know that I am very sensitive to chigger bites, so if they are in an area, I will know within about 12 to 24 hours. But if you're out there wearing repellent, long pants, tall socks, like, and you're not super tasty to them, or you don't react to their bites, like you might not sort of ever encounter them. But I know Oahe downstream pollinator garden is a place that I've picked them up. And then also I've got some friends in Pierre that like their backyard one summer, if I stepped off the patio, I got chiggers. So I am the canary in the coal mine for for chiggers in South Dakota. So if you've got places you want me to test out, let me know. I have to go hang some spongy moth traps at La Fram this week, so who knows? I might be back next week with some tick reports from La Fram, or maybe chiggers. But yeah, it's nothing to keep you out of the outside, but just make sure that you're wearing your repellent and you're prepared for the aftermath. But yeah, Sarah,
So
any final thoughts for people who might want to try the socket pot garden situation?
yeah, just make sure you find some good sturdy planters or pots that you can find multiples of and can probably replace if they would crack or break in the future. I think it'd also be not too hard to replace the socket pot in the future if they would be discontinued, because the hole's already there. You could pull it out and replace it. But yeah, it's a every landscape has a challenge, and so just coming up with those creative solutions and doing some research can get you pretty good results.
Yeah, yeah, and especially thinking about like just, UV rays in South Dakota summers, if you've got, pots out there, eventually they will take some sun damage and needs to be replaced. But yeah, super cool idea. And I am like, where can I try this just because it seems really cool. Also because I would be like lifting it up like every couple of weeks to see if the earwigs like it. Like I'm super curious to be like, what is gonna be living in between these two pots? But no, very cool. And thank you for joining us. And if folks have questions during, the week or whatever, you can reach Sarah at the Central Garden Hotline here in Pierre. So if you've got other garden questions throughout the summer, she'll be available to answer those as well. And Hans, any final thoughts on phosphorus
I was just
in?
going to add into mine. I wasn't trying to say that you should soil test your garden every year necessarily, but every other, or every third year, you're probably fine to see what your level of nutrients is. But soil testing is just a tool to see where your level of nutrients is at in the garden. And if you just use, it's a tool to see what your levels are. And if your levels of certain nutrients are high, you can cut back on how much fertilizer you need to add. That's what I would say for wrapping up.
Awesome. And we had one last minute question come in for Sarah. What was the name of the black device you used to separate your plants from the rocks?
Okay. Those are called plant rings. I did not actually use them. Planting rings, I think, is their term. You can find them on Amazon, is where I stole that picture from. You can order them off of there. When I went to do my landscaping, I did not want to wait for an order, so I went to a box store here in Pierre and picked up the pieces that I thought I could use instantly, because I had a limited time window for help digging.
Yeah, really. I mean, like whoever is going to help you dig those holes, like you are on that schedule because those, I mean, we have a lot of areas in Pierre that have like landscape rock as mulch, and your rocks looked significantly larger than others that I have seen.
Yes, and I think they brought in a whole semi load. They're so deep, it's ridiculous.
Oh my goodness. That's did digging the holes like take out enough rocks that you're like, now I have extra rocks, or you just
Just
they
redistributed
just
them.
distribute them? Oh my goodness. Awesome. Well, that was a great question, and thank you for that. And let's see, flour of sulfur will help deter. So I do have a really old like first aid powder from like the 70s that is great for the bites. So, but you can't find it anymore, so I won't tell you what it is. Um, but yeah, fingers crossed, everyone, as you go out there and garden or hike around South Dakota this week, that you do not encounter some of our more hungry insects and arthropods. But if you do, make sure that you're wearing your repellent and all that fun stuff. But thank you again to our guests, Sarah and Hans, for joining me this evening. Garden Hour will be posted on the YouTube channel. And until then, you can send us your questions via email or to any of our garden hotlines. And we'll see you next Tuesday. Happy gardening.